So let me try to, I know you're not, of course, you don't follow Brazilian politics, but let me give you just a few information, a little bit of information, and see if you can give us a guess. So Brazil right now, it's been all over the media, the discussion if there's the Supreme Court of Brazil is following due process. A lot of people complaining that they're being persecuted for political reasons, which I happen to know. I'm one of these cases. But we had hearings in the United States Congress. I testified there about that. We have members of the U.S. Congress openly saying that Brazil is not following due process. We have articles on mainstream media. The Wall Street Journal, for example, published a piece a couple of days ago about what's going on in these violations. We have several evidences that there is a reasonable doubt that there's a heavily politically motivated persecution ongoing by the Brazilian Supreme Court. Of course, that depends on which side you are, right? If you're on their side, you'll say, well, that's fair. These people committed crime. But if you're on the other side, there's at least a good argument. So would Interpol look into that and consider and say, give people that are there the benefit of the doubt? Or would they, I don't care, this is a member, they issued an order, we're going to fulfill the order? And do they make this sort of evaluation? I ask you this because, for example, usually the cases for asylum in the United States, if there's a reasonable doubt that you are actually being politically persecuted, they usually grant the asylum because, well, you have a case, right? There's some people you have a congressman saying that, you have cases on the mainstream media. So there is a political persecution. So we'd rather give you the asylum, even if we're not sure, than not to give you the asylum and send you back to a country where you're political. So my question is, does Interpol work the same way? Do they give people the benefit of the doubt?
I think I understand your question. And I'm not commenting on the immigration element of it just because I'm not an immigration lawyer. So my silence is not agreement or disagreement. I just don't, it's not my area. Regarding how Interpol is going to look at it, Interpol's decisions have been very, very clear in saying that they are not going to accept as grounds for removal of a red notice a country's general jurisprudential situation of kind of not following due process, even if it's been well documented by, say, Human Rights Watch or Amnesty International or whomever. They will take that into consideration in the general context of the case. But if you cannot assert some sort or offer some sort of substantial competent evidence that happened to you, then you will probably not win your case.
Opa, desculpe interromper o seu vídeo, mas desde 2022 eu continuo com as contas bloqueadas e o passaporte cancelado pelo Xandão. Se você aprecia o meu trabalho e tudo que eu faço pela liberdade de expressão, tem um lugar onde você pode se tornar meu apoiador com uma pequena quantia por mês. Acesse www.paulofigueiredoshow.com e torne-se meu apoiador, e aí você vai receber conteúdos exclusivos e desconto nos meus cursos. Ou então, você pode se tornar meu patrono Gold e passar a me pautar, tem reuniões comigo, você entra para o meu grupo de WhatsApp, que eu uso sempre. O link para tudo isso está aí na descrição.
In other words,
so they tend to believe the government.
Well, so, every red notice is presumed to be valid because this is an organization in which all of the member countries have undertaken an obligation to uphold their domestic laws, the international laws and treaties to which they're bound, and conventions, that sort of thing, and the rules of Interpol. So there is a presumption that is happening. That is a tough pill to swallow when we also see on a daily basis evidence in mainstream media that many, many Interpol countries are violating all of the things we just talked about. But in order for the organization to function, this is one of the bases, this is the foundation, is that we've got to presume our countries are doing what they're supposed to be doing. And that presumption is strong. So you have to overcome that presumption and show not just that something in the general context of cases that come out of Brazil, for example, contain a lot of due process violations, you would have to show that in your case, there have been certain events that have occurred, violations of law, violations of your human rights, violations of your co-defendant's human rights. Maybe your co-defendant is there and something so bad happened to your co-defendant that it's not reasonable to think that you're going to get there and all of a sudden get fair treatment in the same court, right? Now, obviously, you want to show Interpol that if there is an ongoing history of certain types of violations, you need to let them know that, because you don't want them making a decision in the vacuum. And things change from year to year in different countries. Sometimes a country will be terrible on providing access to lawyers or family for someone in jail, and that can change in a couple of years. And that does happen sometimes. So you can't just say, just because they've always been bad at this, now I'm going to go there and I'm not going to get to see my lawyer. Instead, you have to actually show that there's a current violation that directly affects your case, and allow Interpol the information to say, yeah, we think that this case is something we don't want to stay involved in because our rules or the domestic laws of the country or international legal standards are being violated, and we are not here to support illegality. We're here to support law enforcement endeavors that are based in law and due process.
It's interesting because of the case of Alan dos Santos. He's on the Interpol Red Notice list as far as we know, and the United States government denied his extradition and told Brazil, look, these crimes you're attributing to him are speech crimes, and we don't have that here, and we don't extradite people because of opinion crimes.
Yeah, and that's an evaluation. So there's an evaluation that is done. You asked about politically motivated crimes, and this is obviously something that we believe is politically motivated. What you're discussing, and we see dissident speech being suppressed by a lot of countries. China is well known for that. We know that Turkey has done that. We're hearing that Brazil is doing that. So there's a very specific criteria that Interpol looks at to decide, is this politically motivated? And it's not just asking, is it politically motivated? It's asking, even if there is a criminal element to it, because sometimes there is an actual crime charge for which there might be some real basis to articulate, right? But if it's predominantly political and not predominantly criminal, Interpol still doesn't want to be involved in it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So there's a set of criteria that they will evaluate, and it's very clear and laid out in their website and their materials that they make available to practitioners and just to lay people. It's a little bit different than the political motivation criteria that happens in other venues or other, in front of other bodies. But in general, it's meant to identify those kinds of proceedings that are really not meant to stamp out crime or punish crime or catch a criminal. It's really meant to oppress free speech, or to punish someone who ran afoul of an old government, a previous government regime, something like that.
Right.
I said that wrong. To punish someone who ran afoul of the current government that's in power, and maybe they were with a previous government regime.
Right.
Yeah.
I've seen I met a gentleman in detention that he was the son-in-law of the former president of Egypt, and the Muslim Brotherhood still had some agents on, I don't know, their federal police or something like that, and they put his name on the red notice. He was actually able to take the name out, but by then he was already detained by ICE and following the policy that the U.S. government had back then. So it was a very interesting case. Egypt, Muslim Brotherhood. It's like politically, he was with
it depends.
Government.
It depends who's in power, and also we have to remember that many countries change the designation of who is and who is not a terrorist organization, depending on whether their goals and their ideology aligns with that particular organization. There's been a lot of controversy about whether the Muslim Brotherhood is or is not actually a true terrorist organization, despite that designation. I'm not saying it either is or it isn't, but there has been a very robust debate about that. And Egypt is one of the countries who in the past has been observed to have abused the red notice system, specifically targeting journalists. That happened like 2012, 2013. There were a number of journalists who were subject of red notices because of what they wrote about what had happened earlier in Egypt.
Do they look journalist case differently?
What do you mean by that?
I mean, if you're there on the list and you're a journalist, does this like raise an extra concern from them about this being?
I don't know about an extra concern. I think if you apply the rules and the criteria to evaluate a case, most of the time, if it's a journalist, it's going to be pretty straightforward, because if you wrote something bad about someone in power and you got charged with some crime like crimes against, you might see something like crimes against the well-being of the state or hooliganism. Sometimes you see that.
In Brazil, they usually use crimes against democracy or crimes
something
against
like
Brazilian
this.
institutions.
Yeah, and if what they're saying is you wrote this bad thing and made us look bad as a country or provoke somebody to do something, usually that's pretty instantly recognizable as being politically motivated.
Is there anything that the people from the country, I don't mean the government, but maybe the diaspora of Brazil, that they can do to inform Interpol of what's going on, so they be extra careful evaluating cases coming from the Brazilian Supreme Court or something like that? Is there anything that can be done in that matter?
I think that the most effective thing that can be done from a layperson's perspective is responsible, credible journalism. Because we know that in almost any country today, and some countries are worse than others, you can buy a news article like that.
Sure.
So if you have some media pieces by, a relatively untested or unknown media outlet that is favorable to a client, that's not really helpful. It is helpful when you have a credible, established journalistic outfit that is publishing information that's informative. Journalists, this job is getting more and more dangerous. Exposing truth is more and more dangerous. I do think that Interpol is aware of that. And Interpol definitely considers that, the Commission for the Control of Interpol's Files definitely appears to consider information that is coming from a credible source that has been vetted and that appears to be unbiased and based on observations and objective criteria.